Well, good morning, everybody. This is Chris Jones with the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension. And today I've got Jan Groth with us, and we're going to be learning about pollinator plants to plant now and the advantages of fall planting. A little bit about these webinars. They're a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11 a.m. in Arizona. We feature a variety of horticulture and natural resource topics relevant to environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County, Arizona, and any place else in the world with the same concerns. Recording will be posted at my website, extension.arizona.edu/Gila, or please feel free to email me at ckjones@arizona.edu, and I'll give you a link to our Extension YouTube playlist that has all of these webinars in it. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And that's my cue to do our affirmative action poll. So I'm going to throw that up here. And if you just give us a little information about your age and what we can report back on this, this is anonymous. So I'll leave that up for a few minutes while I'm introducing Jan, and then I'll take that down. So thank you so much for taking some time to do that survey for us. All right, today, here's our agenda. Thank you for everybody who came in a little early for the login, a little lag time. You can see we were lagging a little bit this morning. Welcome, my name's Chris Jones, I'm your moderator. Our topic today is pollinator plants to plant now and the advantages of fall planting with Jan Groth. She has about a half-hour slideshow for us. She says she might go over, but we'll still be entertained. We'll have time for a Q&A with Jan, so please put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat box, and I'll relay those to Jan. And we'll wrap up here at noon. I'll stop the recording, and if we still have some questions and Jan's willing to stick around and answer them, we'll get through your questions until we get done here. And so with that, whoops. Anyway, hello, Jan, how are you today?
Hi, Chris, and hi, everybody else. I'm doing great. How about you guys?
I'm sure everybody's doing great. I forgot to mention, I forgot that slide, I closed down. Jan is with the University of Arizona, Cochise County, and the Sierra Vista campus. She's a master gardener, instructor, and coordinator. Anything I missed there?
No, just that I am a plant addict. I'm very, very fortunate to be the Master Gardener Program Coordinator here and also the curator of our Discovery Gardens. It's the first demonstration garden in Cochise County. So we've got a lot going on. We're a very active group down here.
Awesome.
And
okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're all ready to go. I know you've got a lot of information to share with us, so please pull up your slides and let's get started.
All right. So can you see my first slide?
No, you'll have to share the screen.
Okay. Really? I thought I was there. What I'm seeing on my screen is your poll.
Okay, I'll get that poll turned off.
But then shouldn't I? Okay, and I should just be able to hover over the bottom, shouldn't I?
Well, do you need to go back into share screen?
That's what I'm trying to find my share screen. And y'all, thank you for your patience. Chris knows I am not a technological princess here. He's got to always kind of help me a little bit. So your poll is still up on my screen.
I thought I closed it. See if there's any way I can.
All right.
Just hit the box, the square, and close it.
I did.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thought I was in a share screen mode, Chris, and now I can't find it. I'm hovering. I can't find the share screen.
Okay, so you can't find that green button that says share screen?
It's not coming up for me. Y'all, thank you. Bear with me 2 minutes. We'll have this, I promise. I had it just where I had it when I was talking with you. So let's see. I think I'm just going to have to escape it and go back out.
There you go.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah, you are up and going. So go
Okay.
ahead and get it on full screen. There you go.
All righty.
And we're ready.
Something backed us all out, but you know what? We're there now. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is fall planting, because one of my passions is getting everybody excited about planting. And most of us can plant 12 months a year, many of us in Southern Arizona, and even up into Globe, a little north of where I'm in Cochise County. But there's so many advantages to planting now. Fall is the best time of the year to plant, for a multiple of reasons. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't plant in spring. You should always be planting, so don't ever stop. But fall is absolutely the best. First of all, and one of the most favorite reasons is because it is cooling off for all of us. So it is fun to get back out there, get invigorated in the cool temperatures. And even when it starts to get a little chilly, get those jackets on and keep working outdoors. It is the healthiest thing, one of the healthiest things you can do for your body and your mind and your spirit. So do that. First of all, when fall hits, the temperatures are cooling down. So the plants don't have the challenge of the heat, the long duration of the heat ahead of them. They don't have the long duration of those spring winds ahead of them. The soil is still cool from all the summer months. And so you get the plants in, the soil is, I don't mean that, the soil is still warm from the summer months, and the roots can get in and use their energies. They're still stimulated by the warmth. The microbes in the soil are still active and moving because it's still warm. And so everything gets in and really starts to establish over those winter months. If you wait till spring, many times the soil is much cooler at that point. And so you have to, many times the plants will get in and the roots will get in there and they'll sit just a little bit because the warmth is not there to stimulate their growth. And the warmth is not there to stimulate the microbial growth as well. So everything kind of takes a little bit to get moving and shaken. But you get them in the fall and all that partying is still going on in the soil for those root development. Even though the tops, you might not get a lot of growth out of the top at that point, you're going to get root development. You're still going to get root hair development, which is important to be present in the spring when they really have to start taking in that water. So you also don't have the challenge of as many pests in the fall, not as many diseases in the fall. So we could go on and on, but just know that it's a good time. You don't have all the water demands. You don't have quite the nutrient demands, although you might want to do one last fall planting. One last fall fertilization. I'm sorry, I got a little rattled when I couldn't get my screen up, so bear with me while I find my wording. It's a good thing to do fertilization in the fall because it's that fertilization where the roots store those nutrients and then use that energy to push out in the early spring. So, but you don't want to fertilize after about 6 weeks before your first frost. People even ask me in Cochise County, well, when is the first frost? And I don't think we're terribly different than you in Gila, but sometimes it's hard to say. I've been here 45 years. I've seen years when the first frost comes on Halloween, but I've also seen years when the first frost waits until December. So there's really no predicting. So I always kind of say, just get it done by the end of September, and usually you're pretty safe. First week of October, maybe. All right. Let's talk about pollinator plants because they are so important, again, for a multitude of reasons. And this is a great time to get your pollinator plants in. So first of all, what kind of things do you want to plant in the fall? You want to plant all of your ornamental shade trees. You want to do fruit trees. You can do shrubs, both deciduous shrubs and evergreen shrubs. And when I say evergreen, that term means plants that keep their leaves all year long. Perennials, great time to put in your perennials. Great time to put in rose bushes if you're so inclined. There are just a few things you don't want to plant in the fall. And those would be things that are herbaceous. So you have two kinds of plants. You have woody plants that keep their structures all year long. And then you have herbaceous plants that freeze down to the ground and then start back up from the roots. So a lot of the plants that freeze down to the ground and start back up from the roots, you don't want to plant now because they don't have enough time to get their roots established over the winter to use all that energy. Some examples that you don't want to plant now, and we'll cover this in a minute. You probably don't want to plant lantanas now or verbenas because they do freeze back all the way. There are a couple of salvias that freeze down to the ground, as opposed to salvias that stay woody all year. So we'll talk about a few of those things here just coming up. Why are pollinator plants so important? We all know about the pollinators and how important they are for our whole food production globally. It is so important to provide what we call a pollinator corridor. So many of the pollinators have lost their food sources because of concrete, road building, because of sprays that have killed off the wildflowers, in fields or along roadsides. So you can become a pollinator corridor if you simply plant a couple of pots of flowers in your yard. A corridor is a place where a pollinator, a hummingbird, a butterfly, a bee can stop by, take a quick meal of nectar to provide the energy to keep them on their road, to keep them on their mission. And if you have a few plants in your yard that provide nectar, or a few pots of flowers on your patio even that provide nectar, you can call yourself a pollinator corridor and be part of this whole program. So let's start with the salvias, because they're absolutely my favorite of all of them. A lot of people think about penstemons when they think of pollinator flowers that provide nectar, but I'm a real salvia fan because salvias have a multiple bloom season. They have and a longer bloom season. Penstemons are lovely, and to me, penstemons are a great trumpet of spring. One of the very first things to bring in the springtime. But you're going to get a great deal of joy out of the salvias as well. So let me start with my favorite, because if I could only have one plant in the whole world, it would be Salvia Greggii. So my slides are set up here where we're going to list the common names over here first. And do you know, I think a lot of you who are on this know how important scientific names are. I emphasize that not because people who are plant geeks like to throw around Latin names. That's not it at all. Common names, there can be so many common names for the same plant. So if you go to your next door neighbor and you say, oh, what is that pretty pink plant? And your next door neighbor says, well, that's autumn sage. And you go into the nursery and you say, I want an autumn sage, but maybe they only know it by red sage or whatever. You're not maybe always going to get the same plant. There are so many plants that go by this common name, blue sage or blue salvia. You'll see that as we move on here. But if you've got a very specific plant in your mind, if you can at least look up what their scientific name is, scientific names are very specific to that plant, and then you'll always get the plant you're looking for. Okay, so common names on this are autumn sage, red salvia, to name a few. This is Salvia Greggii. This is not necessarily native in our Cochise County, but it is so desert adapted, we like to consider it one of our natives. It's native over in West Texas and through New Mexico. It's a wonderful nectar provider. And I'm sure most of you know anything with a tubular flower, the hummingbirds love because it just fits their little beak so perfectly. It's very colorful, so it draws them in like a huge invitation. That's why flowers are so colorful, not because they're pleasing us. Their fragrance is not because they're pleasing us. Those are simply invitation cards sent out to all the pollinators in the world. Come visit me, come see me. So this is Salvia Greggii. There are many varieties of them. This is a purple, Salvia Greggii purple. And I will tell you, I find that the purples are this one's a little washed out because I took it on a full sun day. But the purples need a little tiny bit more water to get them going, but they do really, really well. They're just very, very vibrant. Salvias can get about 2.5 to 3 feet tall, about 2.5 to 3 feet wide. They do very well if you cut them back once a year. And then once they start to get a little bit woody and larger on the inside, cut those large woody stalks all the way back down to the bottom. And you'll find that a salvia will put all new growth from the root ball. If you've got a lot of people say, well, I have an old one in my yard and it's kind of woody and laying down. I haven't trimmed it in a couple of years. Cut it down to the ground. Leave a couple of inches of stem there. It kind of acts as a place marker so you know it's there, but that's called a rejuvenation cut. And Salvia Greggii respond very well to rejuvenation cuts, and they will start all back up from your root ball. Okay, so there's the purple. Here is my favorite color. This is Salvia Greggii Furman's Red, and that's a close-up of the red. It's just very vibrant. It has a beautiful growth habit. It's lovely, lovely structure. here's a little collection of them. You can see here's a Salvia Greggii white. Here's a purple. This is a coral color. And then your original autumn sage, which is original Salvia Greggii, is back here in the background. This is just a little Salvia Greggii garden, lots of little Greggiis. And I put this slide in because I love to show people a favorite thing in landscaping. You can have so many foliar things around, and the foliar is all pretty, but you see if you add this one piece of structure or a piece of structure, how it shows everything else off. So add an agave or a yucca or some sort of a barrel cactus or anything to many of your foliar gardens, and you're going to find that it accentuates everything around it. Likewise, if you've got a big cactus succulent garden, if you'll add just a little bit of foliage to it, it softens it. So they really complement one another very well. Just another example, there's a little salvia with a little trichoceros stuck in there. And for those of you who've never grown a trichoceros, that's a trichoceros species. Most of them are hybrids, so they don't really put a species name to it, but they come in reds, oranges, pinks, corals, whites, and they will bloom about 3 or 4 times a year, and usually as a surprise. And I walked by this one day, and there was my surprise on a beautiful morning. So tuck them in any place. All right, now, common name, blue salvia. There are so many things that go with a common name of blue salvia. And again, important to know which one, because you can pick up a little blue salvia that looks like this, and I'll get to something else in a minute that can also be labeled blue salvia that is enormous. So this little blue salvia, I consider, this is Salvia Chamodreites, and I consider this the blue sister of Salvia Greggii. It has the same leaf structure, but they're silver blue. It has the same exact flower structure, but it's a beautiful neon blue. And that's its flower close up. A little distorted there, but that's its flower close up. It's gorgeous. There's a collection of them all together. So you got Salvia, the Salvia Chamodreites, Salvia Greggii, there's a trichoceros tucked in, and all in a vignette around a purple leaf plum. I love purple leaf plums also because not only are they another trumpet of spring, they are one of the very first things to put out pink flowers in the springtime, then followed by their purple leaves. But those purples to me just really show up with all the greens around. It's like another little, it's another little focal point. Okay, here is another little guy, often called blue salvia, but it's very different than the blue salvia we just looked at. So this is a native. This is an Arizona native. This is called Mealy Cup Sage. Somebody asked me, does this also get called Sawtooth Sage? No, I'll show you what Sawtooth Sage is in just a moment, which is another native. But this is Mealy Cup Sage. This is Salvia Farnesia. This is the Salvia Farnesia, same plant, just grown a little wilder without a lot of trimming. This is kind of it in its natural state, and this is a natural pollinator garden. This was such a pretty blue that the industry decided that they wanted to do a cultivar off of this. And so you're going to, when you go into your nursery, I'm going to go back to that in a minute. When you go into your nursery and you go into the bedding section of where you find all your little flowers, you'll often find blue salvia. You'll call it Victoria salvia, but this is Salvia Farnesia variety Victoria. So this one's more of a bedding plant variety. You'll find it in 6 packs. You'll find it in little 4-inch pots. You'll find it in 1-gallon pots. This is still a perennial, but this is something, this one does freeze to the ground. So I would probably stay away from planting this now because it doesn't have enough time to get a good root structure to get it through the winter. But come spring, when you see this appear in the nursery, plant it, put it in containers, put lots of fun things around it. You can plant this. It's a great container plant. It's also great in the ground in vignettes or rock gardens or whatever. I was going to show you this little guy. This is a picture of Sawtooth Sage. And many of us in Cochise County get this, comes up wild and natural in during the rainy season. And so sometimes this gets confused with the other one. But this is many people think this is a weed, and they might pull it before they see what a pretty little blossom it has. That's Salvia Subensisa. Okay, here's another one that in a nursery might be labeled blue salvia. You can see that that does not stay a 2-foot tall salvia. This one is common name Cleveland sage or chaparral sage. This one is enormous. So this is Salvia Clevelandii. Wonderful salvia. I'll show you. This is one in the Discovery Gardens. This one in our Discovery Gardens is about 4.5, starting to head up to 5 feet tall. This is easily 4.5 feet wide. These are its flowers close up. It has a marvelous fragrance. In fact, this is one of the most intensely aromatic sages out there. By the way, sage is your common name for salvia. So even like your cooking sage is a salvia. People get that mixed up. They don't realize that salvia and sage are the same thing, and those terms get used interchangeably. So sage is your common, salvia is your genus. But this does have very aromatic leaves. Some people find it too strong for them because you can walk by this plant and if you brush along it, you're going to get that aroma, wonderful fragrance. But most people love the smell of this plant. And what these blossoms, each one of these little pieces of flower, those are all called the florets. Every one of those is full of nectar. Every one of these little spots can be fed on by a butterfly or a hummingbird. Look at all those entry points. This is a buffet just waiting for them to fly by. And those rise up on stalks, and then those flowers appear as whorls all the way up the stalks. And some people like to deadhead this and cut it off when it's finished. But even if you leave it and let it sort of go to seed, the dried flowers are even very, very ornamental. One thing about this plant, because of its size and its vigor, it is good to cut this back by at least a half once a year. It might hurt you to cut it back that much, but if you don't, this guy can get woody down in the middle where the sun doesn't get to it any longer. So cut it back so that the air and sun can get to it, and it can all rejuvenate. You'll be much happier with it. Okay, on the other end of the spectrum, this is a little guy. This guy is called Salvia Nemorosa. And look at all the common names. It all depends on who grew it and who put their name on it. And that's what happens in the industry. They might grow something just a little bit different, and then they can put their little patented name on it. So all these common names, another blue sage, wild sage, caradona, woodland sage, and the clary sage. But this little guy gets anywhere from, say, 9 inches tall to say 18 inches at the most, depending on the different varieties. You'll find this in a darker purple, in a light purple, you'll find it in pink, and you'll find it in white. Salvia Nemorosa. It's a cute little sage. It is perennial. It comes, and this one does freeze down a little bit, but my experience tells me this one does come back even if you plant it late. I have several of these in a rock garden, and they just perform over and over again. They do want to have their regular water. It doesn't mean they're a water monger. It just means all of these guys want to be watered thoroughly when they're watered, and then they want to go on a cycle that when the top couple of inches of soil begins to dry out, it's time to water them again, not stress them out. But this is a great one for along a path, in a rock garden, in a vignette under a tree. It's even pretty if you just got one little pot to show it off as its own specimen. Salvia Nemorosa. And if you go, I can't close up on this, but if you look at those flowers, again, this is one of those multiple floret flowers that has lots of feeding sites on one flower. Here is another one that's becoming very popular in the nurseries, and you'll find it in the springtime. This is called Mystic Spires. And so this is another hybrid. They took Salvia longispicata and crossed it with the Farnesia, which is the blue salvia, one of the blue salvias we saw before. And this is a really lovely performer. It does freeze down to the ground in the winter. So, and I don't think you're going to find it in the nursery right now. And why am I talking about it in a fall planting thing? Because I just want you to know it's magnificent. So when you see it in the spring, it makes a super pollinator plant. It has a little bit larger leaves, so it looks a little different than a lot of the other salvias, but Mystic Spires, and that's usually how it's labeled. And we'll talk in a few minutes about the size. Well, let me tell you now, the size of leaves. When you see things that are much larger leaf, many times that means that they can take a shadier spot. Think of your leaves as solar panels. As solar panels that are taking in the light, and also they also are losing moisture in their transpiration. So if you've got a larger leaf, it takes in so much light that you're going to say, maybe it could use a little bit of shade so that I can decrease that surface area so it doesn't have to take in so much harsh sun. Also, put it in a little bit of shade where that big surface area doesn't lose quite so much water. It doesn't lose so much in transpiration when it gets so heated up. And we're going to see another example of that here in just a couple of moments. Now, this does want some nice sun to bloom. We have some of these by a pond in our discovery gardens, right in a deep shade, and they do all right, but they don't bloom as proficiently. So I think an ideal spot for something like this with larger leaves would be either under a mesquite where it gets dappled shade, or like your dappled sun, or on an early morning. That morning east sun is your most gentle, most perfect garden in your whole yard. Okay, this is an annual, so this is not a perennial, but I throw it in here because, again, it's another great little plant. It's another super pollinator plant with multiple florets. You're going to see this coming on in the spring. I have still seen this in the nurseries. They're having it in as late as now. So this might be one that if you plant it now, you're not going to get it back again. First of all, it is only an annual. For those of you who are new gardeners, annual means it only has 1 year life cycle. It goes from seed to flower, to leaf, to flower, to seed, all in 1 year, and then that's it. That's its whole party. But annuals bloom so prolifically that it's worth planting them because they give you such a big bang for their buck. They are amazing. So if you see them in the nursery, do not expect this to come back next year. But again, another little guy, see this common name? Red salvia. It also goes by blood sage. It also goes by scarlet sage and Texas sage. Texas sage can be misleading because some people call Texas Rangers Texas sage. So see, those common names, you gotta know which ones you're talking about. So this little plant is called Salvia coccinea. And that coccinea is Latin for a red hues. All right, here's another great one. So this is big. This does freeze. So this is another one that you shouldn't plant past the middle, maybe the middle of October. This is Salvia leucantha, Mexican bush sage. It will freeze to the ground. So you want to cut it. It'll die back, and you want to cut it off. Maybe leave about 2 or 3 inches on the top. I always like to leave a little bit. First of all, I think it helps keep the roots a little warmer. Secondly, it marks the place of where that plant is. And it will come right back from the roots in the spring. Now, it will bloom a little bit in the spring, but its big show is the fall. So it takes that whole grow season to produce a gorgeous plant that in some people's gardens will get 3 feet. I've been in other gardens where they've got them beautifully irrigated and beautifully composted and top dressed on the top. And I've seen them get as tall as 5.5 feet tall. But it is a magnificent color and quite a show. And this is its flower close up. Look at all the florets from which to feed. And the other fun thing about this is if you cut these off in stems, hang them upside down, tie a little bouquet, tie bouquet and upside down, hang them up and let them dry. They make a great dried flower bunch. So if you have a little garden shed or a garage potting shed, a patio where you like to decorate with natural things, these make a beautiful hanging dried flower bouquet. And how many times have you heard people say this season, pardon me, I'm really not sick. These are my allergies. I'm going to tell you that again. So if you hear a little cough, I do apologize. I threw this in just because this is your cooking sage. This is Salvia officinalis, and the Salvia officinalis does bloom. It will bloom little purple flowers, but again, there's your sage, and that's the species of the cooking sage you buy to put in your herb garden. It is evergreen. It makes it beautifully through the winter, so you can cook with it all winter. It comes in a plain green. It also comes in variegated leaves. And the term variegated means that a leaf will have multiple colors on it, 1, 2, 3, or 4 colors. So the variegated sages I've seen have got green and white on one leaf. I've even seen them with green, white, and gold. I've seen them with green, white, and a little bit of pink. So there's a variety out there. So not only are they a great cooking sage, but they're a pretty little landscape plant. Don't forget your herbs. I'm on a tangent. Now you got to follow with me because I do this. But don't forget your herbs when you're landscaping in little rock gardens, or maybe you've got a shrub in a pot as a container plant and you want something around it to make it beautiful. Don't forget your herbs. Oregano is an evergreen herb that's gorgeous. Also a beautiful pollinator plant when it puts on its flowers. Lemon thyme, any of the thymes are evergreen. And when they bloom, they're little bitty flowers that are very delicate, but are visited by the bees very, very often. So your thymes, your oreganos, your sweet marjorams, all of those do little bitty flowers on them and are wonderful pollinator plants as well as fabulous cooking plants. Back to okay, so now we're coming to another common name, Russian sage. But is this a sage, true sage? No, it's simply a name it picked up. But this is a totally different genus called Porosky. This is Porosky Atroplisifolia. And when you get up close to the flowers, I wish I had a close-up of the flowers. Again, multiple florets all over this plant. We have one of these in the Discovery Gardens. My picture of it is washed out, as you'll see. But in truth, this was way too sunny for me to take this picture. This sits next to a purple leaf plum. Again, I love the contrasting flowers, the contrasting colors, the purple and the brilliant blue. And when they're lovely together. But again, this little Russian sage will really draw the pollinators for you. Not to mention, it's kind of a unique color. It's more of an icy blue. And will be one of the very few icy blues that really shows up in your gardens. Looks beautiful with all the rest of the greens. Let's go to the Penstemons. Again, as I said, I like the Salvias better if I had to choose between the two, just because of the bloom season and the length of bloom. But who can argue with the Penstemons? Again, they are one of the first soundings of spring. They're so early. And this is one of the most common natives that we have. I know in Cochise County, and I'm thinking, Chris, are they native up in Globe as well? I'm thinking maybe they are.
Yes, we've got Perry's Penstemon, several Penstemons that grow in the Globe area.
Everywhere. And I know that when ADOT is reseeding different things and trying to revegetate along roadsides, they will often include seeds of Perry's Penstemon because they do reseed so beautifully. So Perry's Penstemon is Penstemon perryi, and you'll find that one of the earliest things to bloom. The pollinators will be all over it. It stays in a great bloom for 4 to 5 weeks. And then all these stalks go quite brown while the flowers are going to seed. Those seeds will be thrown everywhere. If you put a couple of Penstemons in your yard, you'll have plenty of them. This one, and then you'll want to, once it goes to seed, then you're going to want to cut all that back because it would be a little bit unsightly. But that's all right. You're going to get lots of Penstemons back next year. That's a close-up of Perry's Penstemon. This was out in the Discovery Gardens. This is the male black cutter bee. And so funny, some people call them the teddy bear bees, but it's classic of how the pollinators find that Penstemon and they're on it. Another Penstemon, Rocky Mountain Penstemon. This is Penstemon strictus. So this does not get as large as the Perry's Penstemon, but this just shows you there are lots of them out there from which to choose. Many times you'll find the Penstemons in the nurseries in late spring. They got to have a little time to grow up at the growers before they start putting them out for sale. And this one you could plant in the fall. It's a good perennial, a good strong perennial. Another Penstemon called showy Penstemon. So beard's tongue Penstemon gets used on a lot of Penstemon as well because it kind of describes their form. But this particular one is Penstemon Spectabilis. And that's the Spectabilis as a whole plant. Again, you can see the leaves are a little different. The flowers are a little different, but wonderful for the pollinators. Again, a good perennial, a good one you could plant in the fall. There's desert Penstemon. Oh, that's a fuzzy picture, and I'm sorry about that. I thought I had a better photo, but this is Penstemon Pseudospectabulous. I have this one in my personal garden at home. Wonderful performer. Let me go back. I will tell you this. Perry's Penstemon will give you one magnificent bloom in the spring, and then that's it. It's not going to bloom again after its 4-week show. But some of these other guys, Penstemon strictus, will often bloom for you again during the monsoon, sometimes even a third time. And Pseudospectabulous will often give you a couple, 2 to 3 blooms intermittently. Especially if you can kind of deadhead it back Deadheading, for those of you who are new gardeners, deadheading simply means you're going to cut off the spent flowers. If you don't cut off the spent flowers, the mama plant says, well, my whole goal was to produce seed. If you cut the spent flowers off, she says, uh-oh, there went my seed producing body. I got to start over and make new flowers. So anytime you have flowers, whether it's roses or pansies in the winter or butterfly bushes, whatever, keep them deadheaded, keep the spent flowers cut off. That's the close-up of Penstemon Pseudospectabulous. How pretty is that? Very delicate and beautiful. Here is one of my very favorite Penstemons because it really does bloom for you 2 to 3 times. And it's a little different color. Again, different leaves. This is Eaton's. Uh-oh, this is a misspell. That's not supposed to say Easton. I wonder if that would, anyway, that should say Eaton's Penstemon, or people call it firecracker Penstemon. So this is Penstemon Etonii. This one does not like to be in a wet place. It will benefit from being on regular irrigation. So just but like a 1/2 gallon an hour emitter, and be sure you put this one, well, any of the Penstemons, it's true, but this one particularly, don't put it in a downward slope or inside a big berm or something. This one wants to be, even though you're going to irrigate it, I'm a huge believer in drip irrigation. That's a whole nother talk, but you want to put it a little bit on an upside so that even though it gets its drink, it can shed that water back off of the roots as it needs to. So that is but it's a wonderful plant. There's its close-up flower. Another one, this is my favorite Penstemon in my garden, along with the Eaton's. So Eaton's Penstemon and Penstemon barbatus. This little guy blooms for me 3 times a year without fail. Love him, love him, love him. Penstemon barbatus. All right, here's another native, Arizona yellow bells. It's washed out by too sunny a picture, but this is a great plant in Tucson and Phoenix area where it's a little warmer. And I'm thinking I bet Globe stays warmer than we do. This one does not freeze out in the winter. In Cochise County, because we're about 4,600, some places 5,000 feet, this will freeze out. And Chris, aren't you more like 36, 38, something like that?
Yeah, 3,600 feet in the Globe area. And, you know, the nice thing about some of these shrubs is you can take a little risk. Yeah. And hopefully they survive, because look at the spectacular, yellow bells are such a cool, beautiful plant.
Oh, it's a beautiful plant. Oh, and even though it will freeze back, it's not going to freeze at your roots. So we have Arizona yellow bells at my home and in the gardens here. I live at 5,100 feet. Our gardens are at 46. It does freeze, but it all comes back from the roots. Right. So it's a real good perennial. This is a native, so this is called Tacoma stands. And then this is such a wonderful plant that in the industry, they've developed many varieties off of it that are kind of smaller shrubby, that are again perennials. So I'll show you. So this is a bad picture, but this is a Tacoma Red. You'll find Tacoma Red, Tacoma Orange, Tacoma Yellows. There are some called Sparkies. There are some called Sunset Orange, Red Dawns. Everybody's got a different name on it. But if you see the name Tacoma, that's what you're dealing with. So this is one just to show you that you can also grow them in containers. This is one called Sparky, Tacoma Sparky. And can you see all the butterflies on this plant? Butterflies everywhere. I tried to put a video in. I actually videoed all the activity on this the other day, but I'm not the greatest technological person. I didn't know how to embed a video, but I'll learn for the next time. But it is huge. And since this guy bloomed, I don't believe there's been a pollinator that's left it alone. That's its close-up. How gorgeous is that? Tacomas. Here's a little kind of a newy garden. So this is the Tacoma Red. There's a Tacoma stands that's a brand new planting, so it's not very big yet. That's why it looks so little. But that will eventually grow up and join all the rest of these taller plants. And then just to kind of accent it, there's a beautiful Agave truncata. Again, I love putting structure in with lots of foliage. It just, I don't know, makes everything come together. This is just a little collection of stuff that's just blooming at the monsoon, and again usually full of activity in the middle of the day. This is a Texas Ranger. This is one called Green Cloud. There's a crepe myrtle. That's a Cherokee Red. This is a good old, plain old Salvia Greggii, autumn sage. And then this that you see here is called Orange Jubilee. And what that is that the industry took Tacoma stands and crossed it with a vine called Trumpet Creeper, which is a big orange-belled thing, and then came up with a thing called Orange Jubilee, which is kind of a shrubby, huge, viney shrub. It goes up, it arches over, it looks like a big fountain and blooms like crazy. It does freeze back, but you could still plant it. I would not plant it toward the end of October, though. If I'm going to get this in, I'd get that one in soon if you can find it in the nursery. Talk about a couple of trees. Draw the hummingbirds. Desert willow. I got about 5 favorite trees, and this is absolutely one of them. There is nothing like, even when it's not blooming. Have you ever gone for a hike in the desert and you get this aroma and you wonder where it's coming from, and then you realize it's a desert willow? I think it's one of the most sensuous smells in the desert. A lot of people also love the smell of creosote. It's the same kind of concept. You can't stick your head into this tree and smell it. You got to walk by, and the aroma, especially on a hot sunny day, it kind of activates those oils and the aroma finds you. It's just a wonderful scent. Beautiful form. So this is your native desert willow. The natives are pink. This is a variety that's a burgundy color called Timeless Beauty. I think Timeless Beauty is actually a cultivar by Monrovia growers. By the way, your desert willows are all Chilopsis linearis. So this one is a Chilopsis linearis Timeless Beauty. Here's a Chilopsis linearis burgundy. That's a deep burgundy. This guy needs to be trimmed up a little bit. He's starting to get a little low branching there. And then this is the close-up of what the burgundy flower looks like. Can't you just see beaks in that from the hummers and bees on that? It's beautiful, beautiful flower. Some people feel that the native one, the pink one, has more nectar and is better for the pollinators. I don't know. I'll tell you that I have a Timeless Beauty in my yard. I've also got a burgundy in my yard, and all of them are visited. I've never heard one hummingbird say, "There's not enough nectar here, I'm leaving." They hang out. So I don't know. Maybe the nectar is not quite as plentiful, but it's there. It's there. All right, this is a little plant called Lavender Spice. Some people call it Mexican oregano. I don't like to use the common name Mexican oregano because Mexican oregano also refers to an herb that's a low-lying green herb with yellow flowers on it. So I think it can be easily confused. It took the common name oregano because the leaves smell like oregano, although you wouldn't really want to cook with it. It's not very culinary friendly. So I learned it as lavender spice. I still call it that. It has the same growth habit as the Salvia Greggii. Can get quite large. You can keep it cut once a year to keep it smaller. There's a Greggii behind it. You can see how pretty they look together. 4 Frenchies and a doodle sitting in front of the lavender spice. Couldn't help it. They were all very angry that they had to stay. Just, why are you making me do this? But I couldn't resist it. All right, and that's the close-up of lavender spice. Again, another beautiful trumpet-shaped flower, but different than all the other things we've seen. This is more of a pinker lavender instead of the blues and the deep purples. So it's a great accent. It's another addition to your garden, makes a beautiful contrast. And you're going to find that if you put different things in, they're going to be blooming differently. Not to mention, you never want a monoculture. When you go out walking in nature, you never see the same thing over and over again. Nature is made of lots of varieties, so it draws lots of different pollinators. And if one little pest comes in and wants one little guy for his meal, then he's not going to attack all the other guys because maybe he's specific on something. I will tell you, the only pest I ever see on salvias or even this little lavender spice are the spittle bugs, if you can call them a pest. If you ever walk by your salvias and you see the little droplets of white foam, looks like somebody spit on them, it's just a little spittle bug. He produces that as his metabolic end product, and so he's just a little bitty. It's in the piercing sucking mouthpart insect group, but they just really don't do much damage at all, and they produce that spittle around them as kind of a protective mechanism. And so all you have to do is just spray it off with a hose. Goes right off, they go away, no sprays needed. You usually don't even have to use soapy water. A good sharp shot of water and it's gone. That's the only pests I ever see on any of these beautiful pollinator plants. I threw in lavender. I find that the bees and the hummers love the lavender and the butterflies out in our discovery gardens. This is English lavender. These blooms are a little bit larger than most of the English I see. I will say that English, your species is angustifolia, Lavandula angustifolia. Your English is your most cold hardy. It's the one that is going to tolerate the cold better than the other lavenders. The second most cold hardy lavender is, now this is a bad picture, but it's the only one I had right away, is French lavender. So you can see the difference in the flowers. See the great big head with the flower petals that come up off the top. Again, compare that, it's different. And look at the leaf. The leaf is straight in the English. And in the French, if you look at this area, you might be able to see it, but those leaves have little serrations all around the edge. Thus, its name, its species is dentata, for teeth. The little leaves look like that little teeth cut around the edges. So that's French lavender, and I think that's the second most cold hardy. I made a mistake and didn't get the slide in of the main plant, but there is a plant called desert lavender. It's not a lavender, it's actually Hyptis emerii. It can be a little bit cold tender if you put it way out in the open here in Cochise County. If you plant it in a little bit of a microclimate where it's tucked either under a tree or tucked in with other plants, it does beautifully, but these are its flowers. And again, a wonderful pollinator plant. And it took its common name of desert lavender because the leaves do smell a little lavenderish. They've got a fun scent to them if you crush them. It has the growth habit, looks a lot like a Texas Ranger for those of you who know that plant. It'll get 3 to 4 feet tall. You can cut it back once a year, but it is evergreen, so it just makes a nice little silver-leafed shrub. Tree, let's talk about another tree, Vitex, also called chaste tree, also called monk's pepper tree, but this is the Vitex agnus castus, and it is a deciduous tree. So it does lose its leaves in the winter, but this is an excellent time to plant it. All of your deciduous trees, great time to plant them in the fall. Let them get established and let them push out their leaves with their new spring energies in the springtime after they've become established over the winter a little bit. It waits a little bit longer because it is a very desert adapted tree. It loves the heat. So it's going to be a little bit longer pushing out its leaves. Just because you don't see leaves right in the beginning of March, don't worry about it. It'll be there. It'll be there. Be patient with it as long as it's had a regular irrigation. And by the way, I'm going to hit another tangent real quickly. Don't forget to irrigate in the winter. So many people, the rains stop and people don't remember to pick up their watering again. I find more people lose plants in October than almost any month of the year because the humidity's dropped to nothing, the rain's gone away, and nobody remembers that they got to keep watering things because everything's still growing. The soil's still warm, many of the days are still warm, and then through the winter, even when things are dormant, even when things are deciduous, remember to water every 3 weeks. You don't want those roots to totally desiccate. You don't want them to get soggy, but you don't want them to totally dry out. So keep them hydrated. So this is it looks like an upside down, for those of you who grow, I'm blank. Oh, Jan, I lost my word. Anyway, it's multiple florets. It's not real fragrant, but it's a beautiful little tree. This is a smaller tree that makes a great tree for a courtyard or a small area of your yard. Some people find that it will put up runners. I think it depends on the tree you've gotten hold of, because some of them put up some volunteers, and I've seen other Vitex that never shoot up a runner at all. But they're nice. They also come in white. I find that the white Vitex is sort of faded out. It's not particularly gorgeous. It's some white plants are really prolific and very prolific bloomers, but the white Vitex is not as pretty. So if I was only going to plant one Vitex, I would definitely go for the purple one. Good, small courtyard tree, show off its multiple trunks. This one could even be trimmed up a little bit further to show off those pretty multiple trunks. All right, let's go back to natives. Native shrub. And these native shrubs get called so this would be Thurbers. I couldn't put them all in here. Thurbers, hummingbird plant. Some people call it the hummingbird bush. There are all sorts of names for this, but Anacicanthus, if you know this word, Anacicanthus thurberi is our native, and it's deciduous plant, but it comes out and blooms once the spring gets warm. Give it a little bit, it's got to put its leaves on, then get its flowers going, and then it begins to bloom. It's kind of a rusty orange, huge pollinator drawer. That's its flower close up. Then it has a sister named Anacicanthus Quadrifetus. If you can see through this gar that's blooming there, and I'm sorry about that. Again, a deciduous plant, but the Anacicanthus Quadrifetus, its leaves are a little bit greener, its flowers are a little bit brighter red. It's a native in nearby states, in nearby high deserts, not a native right here. The thurberi is your native. The leaves are a little duller green, flowers a little more orange. But this is your Anacicanthus Quadrifetus. You'll see it labeled Mexican flame, hummingbird bush. The thing I love, I have both of these in my personal garden at home. The thurberi kind of blooms a little bit in the spring, and about 2 weeks later, the Quadrifetus blooms, and then the thurberi blooms. So it's like an up and down piston all through the grow season. There's always one of them are showing off and drawing in all the critters. That's the close-up of the Quadrifetus. The butterfly didn't pass him up, did he? Okay. Bad photo, I'm sorry. But this is Augustaci. I heard people call it Augustaki. I was taught Augustaci. We can all do the tomato thing. It doesn't matter. Common name, Hummingbird Mint. There are lots of Augustacis. There are some called giant hyssop. Some of them come in blue, light blue. This is one called Kana. There's some called Anna's Hummingbird Mint. If you want to look them up, I've seen many of these on anniesperennials.com. I've seen them at High Country Gardens. I've seen them on all sorts of different websites, and it's a wonderful plant. It does freeze a little bit in the winter, comes right back. Huge, huge pollinator plant. This is its flower close up. Look at all that's going on. And it is a member, if you can feel it's a member of the mint family. The stems are square like all the mints. The leaves smell minty. It's got a great fragrance when you walk by it. And every different species, every different variety of Augustaci is a little different. So that's a bright pink one. Here's a pretty pink orange one. At my home, I have 3 different colors of blue, and I also have another color of orange. So you can collect and do a whole Augustaci garden. And they're all kind of blooming together, and then when one's taken a break, something else is still blooming. So add them to your gardens. They'll get and some of them, they're different sizes, so when you buy them, kind of look at what they do. The Anna's Hummingbird Mint will get a good 2.5 feet tall, but some of the blue ones will stay a little bit shorter. So just read what their ultimate size is. Vines. There are great vines that draw the hummers and the butterflies and all the bees and the bats and anything you're trying to draw in. This is called, one of its common names is coral honeysuckle. I think this is my favorite vine because of its magnet. And so this is Lonicera. So Lonicera is the genus for your honeysuckles. We're going to talk about 3 honeysuckles next. So Lonicera is honeysuckle. This is sempervirens, semper meaning always, virens meaning green. So it's fairly evergreen. It does not self-attach to anything. It does not put out claws. It does not put out aerial roots. You give it a trellis and it will wind. It'll self-wind. Lonicera sempervirens, fabulous. On a trellis, on a fence. Put it on an arbor. This is a close-up of one that I had. I put this in as a little 1 gallon, and within a year it did this. It was just a little bitty old thing. And its first year, it put all that growth on and all that color. Wonderful performer. Here's your basic honeysuckle. Remember when we were kids and you would pinch off the little pieces of the flower in the back and pull those little stamens through, and the nectar would be on the tip. I don't find it works quite as well in Arizona because I guess it's just because we don't have as much moisture. But I grew up in Missouri, and that was a really fun thing to do. So this is your classic Japanese honeysuckle, also called Hall's honeysuckle. So it's Lonicera, japonica, and often the growers will stick on Hollyana. So all those names go together. Don't let it confuse you. Again, a twirler, it does not self-attach. There's its flower. And then you say, oh, I didn't know it bloomed white and yellow. No, it blooms white. The Japanese honeysuckle is a primary pollinator plant for moths. They are a primary pollinator. Moths are drawn more to the scent because honeysuckle is so sweet. And the moths are drawn way more to the scent as opposed to butterflies than they are to the color. So they're drawn to the scent of the white flower. And once it's pollinated, it turns yellow. So you've got your unpollinated and your pollinated flowers on the same plant. Okay, I'm going to show you this. So this is purple leaf honeysuckle. Flower is very similar to the Japanese honeysuckle we just looked at. Let me show you the flowers. That's the close-up. But the purple leaf, you see how it starts off purple and then opens up. It still maintains some corals and some golds, and it's got a little bit more pink to it. And you can see the purple veins in the leaf, and even the stems have purpling in the stems. So I wanted to show you this though, in this purple, see how the stems have purpling in them? So this is one grown in the shade. You see how the leaves are larger because they've adapted to expand their solar panels to take in more light and to be able, and they don't, they're not losing so much transpiration in the heat, losing so much water. Whereas this one is grown in the full sun. And you see how it's evolved to make its leaves a little bit smaller. So the leaves are closer together, closer on the stems. They all stay close, they stay small, they lose less water, and they take in less harsh sunlight. But that's purple leaf honeysuckle, and it's a beauty. We planted this in the Discovery Garden along a little fence around a whole display, and it filled our fence in on the first season. Vines you should cut back once a year because of many of you who've grown vines, some people complain, well, they get so woody in the back, they get so woody behind. Well, that's because they keep growing out, they grow out, and then the sun can't get to them and the air can't get to them. So if you keep them trimmed back once a year, then the back receives the sun, plus the fact it stimulates new growth. It gets the air circulating in there, and it gets the sunlight in there to produce the growth. That's just a purple leaf. This is in our Discovery Gardens. This is probably a 2.5 to 3-year-old vine that we've had to cut back. That's purple leaf honeysuckle growing in with a little rose we planted in there. All right. I know we said you don't want to wait very much longer at all if you're going to plant lantanas and verbenas because they will freeze back. I think globe area is going to stay a little warmer than we do in the winter, but still, if you have found that they freeze back in your wintertime, you may not want to plant these too much further down in October, but do put them in. They make such wonderful pollinator plants. I'm going to go to this real quick. Let's see. Let's look at a flower. When you look at these flowers and all these multiple florets and the flowers big and open, butterflies aren't as good at hovering in the air the way a hummingbird can. So they got to have a place where they can land and take their meal in. So when you offer them a big open flower, or even something that's a single flower, not necessarily one with multiple florets, a big cone flower, a big daisy, anything where they can land and take nectar and rest while they're eating and then take off. Lantanas and verbenas offer just that, a big open space for them to land. So let's go back. So this is lantana, and there are two varieties. You've got trailing, and then you have a bush type. Trailings go out. They may rise up a couple of feet, maybe even only 18 inches, but they can trail out a good 3 to 4 feet. So the common name is trailing lantana, scientific name Lantana montevidensis. Now this is important because often when you go into a nursery, it'll just be labeled lantana. You see lantana and they all look the same when they're babies in a 1-gallon pot. Let me show you something. This is a bush lantana. You buy this little, come back. You buy that little guy in a pot, he's going to look the same as this little guy in a pot. But this one is trailing. This one is a bush that gets big and tall, and doesn't trail. How do you tell the difference? The way I always kept it straight when I was learning is the trailing species is montevidensis. It's a long trailing word. Whereas Lantana bush camera, Lantana camera is the bush variety. I think of a camera as being a big three-dimensional box. And that way, you know that the camera lantana is the big three-dimensional bush. So we'll go back here for 1 second. The trailing lantanas can come in purples, they come in whites, they can come in yellows, which are a little lighter, or they can come in golds. That's a gold variety, and it will be much more intense than something labeled yellow. And there's its flower close up. And this just shows that you can find it in the white and the purple. Lantanas do freeze to the ground in the colder weather. They need warmth, a lot of warmth to push them back up. So if you're in an area where you lose them to the cold, the first thing I would tell you is the first year that you have lantana in, it will all turn brown if it freezes. Don't cut it back. You're going to be inclined to want to cut all that off for aesthetic purposes to make it look better. But if you'll leave that, it acts as a blanket its first year to keep that root ball warmer. After it's established and back next winter, you can cut it when it freezes. But the first year, leave it as a blanket. Okay. Another little thing about lantana. This is the bush type. I don't see it on the trailing, but on the bush type, you can get these little berries that are formed after the flowers. These little seed berries. And if you, we had one dog one time, my daughter had a dog that was very attracted to these. We had to put a stop to it because these can be toxic to dogs. You know, 1 or 2 bites, you don't have to worry. But if you have a little dog that becomes obsessed with these, they can be toxic, and they can, they've even been known to cause like dementia states in canines. So they are a toxic thing if eaten in a large quantity. Let's talk about verbena. First thing I want to tell you is verbena, the genus has been changed to the word glandularia. I don't like that. I don't even like to use it when I talk about verbena because it sounds like an endocrine system disease state. I don't like that genus. Why would anybody take a beautiful word like verbena and change it to glandularia? I don't get it. So I'll continue to not be proper when I talk about this plant. All right, so verbenas get confused often with lantanas because they have the big open flower structure with lots of florets on them. But verbenas come back early in the spring, lantanas come back a little bit later. Verbenas don't have a scent to their leaves, where the lantanas, if you crush their leaves, it has a definite scent to them. This one is a native verbena, and it gets confusing because when you read about it in books, the books don't agree. So some of the books will call it rock verbena, some will call it moss verbena, and some will call them interchangeably. But this is Verbena Pochella. And if I could get close, do you see the leaf in here? Do you see how the leaf is cut into pieces? It's not one full leaf. It's got little sections of a leaf with lots. Okay, there's a word for that. And Chris, if you can think of it, I've lost the word. But there's a word for that type of a leaf where it's not one full piece of leaf. It's all cut into sections. That's a very common thing that you see in native plants. And that's an evolution. Because what those plants, like a mesquite tree, like an acacia, all the acacias, they've all cut. Say it again?
Compound.
Thank you. They've all cut themselves down into compound leaves. They've cut themselves so that there's not so much big surface area. That way it doesn't take in the harsh sun. It doesn't have so much surface area to lose water during transpiration. So they evolve to become leaves that look like this with little leaflets everywhere. And that's what you're going to see in this native verbena. The other difference I find in verbenas and lantanas, for verbenas to look good, you got to kind of keep them deadheaded. Otherwise, they can get a little gangly at the end. Lantana is one of the very few flowering plants that you don't have to deadhead very much at all, if you even ever do it, and it will just keep blooming anyway. It is very unique in that manner. Here's another native verbena, and this is Goodings Verbena. Yes, indeed, it does have 2 G's, 2 D's. That's not a typo. Goodings Verbena is Verbena Goodingii. And here in where I live, I'm sure up in Globe, you'll find this along the roadsides. You'll find it hiking in grassland, especially in your transitional areas where you go from a grassland up into a mountainous region. We find these everywhere. One thing I like to brag on this. This was one of the very first things we planted in the Discovery Gardens. Now, this is a short-lived perennial. It's short-lived, but we got at least 3 years out of it. Perennial means it comes back year after year. And to be a perennial, you have to be able to live 3 years or more. Many perennials will live a long time, up to 25, 30 years. But this is a short-lived. Oops, I lost my slide. Come back. Come back. So we planted about 4 of these. It was the only thing in the garden that bloomed except for pincushion flower. This one in pincushion flower bloomed 12 months a year, never took a break, not in the snow, not in the freeze, kept blooming for 3 solid years until he said, I'm so tired. And we said, thank you for coming. And we pulled it out and gave it a rest. But it's a wonderful little plant. And I don't have pincushion flower in here, but it does the same thing. Pincushion's not a native, but it is a wonderful annual. It's a little perennial guy. It's not annual. It's a little perennial guy, and it's called Scabiosa is its genus. So look for pincushion flowers as well. Here's another verbena. This one I think is the most vibrant of the verbenas. It's called sandpaper verbena, Verbena rigida, because if you go up and feel those leaves, they are rigid. And if you rub them with your fingers, it sounds like you're rubbing sandpaper. Keep it regularly irrigated when you get it going. And I find that this one is a little bit fussy. If you miss a watering, it's a little cranky, but it doesn't have to be wet, just regular. Don't let it dry up on you. And it will indeed spread by underground stolons, by the ones along the surface of the ground, and you'll have several more. You might want to treat it like a weed and pull some of them up. You might also let it go crazy and have a gorgeous spread of sandpaper verbena. Okay, a shrub. I have a handful of shrubs, but in my arsenal at my house, this one is the most plentiful of all the shrubs I have. It's also probably the most plentiful of all the shrubs in the Discovery Garden because it does so much. This guy is called Glossy Abelia. Now there's another variety of Abelia called Abelia Edward Goucher that blooms pink flowers, and the leaves are a little bit lighter, and it's equally a good performer. But I love this guy. Its leaves are green and glossy and healthy and beautiful, and it starts producing these white, beautiful trumpet-shaped flowers. And then these white flowers bloom, at least 3 months, maybe 4. And then behind these white flowers are these little pink leaflets, and all those little pink leaflets stay on there till the freeze comes, whenever that might be for your area. This will take a full blaring sun. It will take a full deep shade and anything in between. I have some at home that I have out in big planters. I have one in a pot at a hot pool side. I also have about 12 of them as underplantings under oak trees, because they can also look very, very woodsy. They get kind of fountainy and beautiful. And so they make a good woodsy flower if you want something that looks woodsy in nature. But if they get too woodsy on you, you can kind of cut them back and make them look a little bit neater if you want, although you certainly don't want to meatball them. But really, really versatile. And the slide I forgot to put in here, I took a picture just yesterday of my Abelia so like I said, I have about 12 of them out under the oaks, and the whole place was alive with butterflies on this plant. Even though it's white, you would think, well, I didn't think butterflies liked white, but they were just drawn to it. So consider this plant. It can get quite large. It can easily get 4 feet. In some areas, it could get 5, but you can keep it controlled. I've seen some areas where it gets even taller than that, where people never ever trim them or cut them. And you can containerize it. You can do whatever you want. And it also comes in varieties. It comes in one with variegated leaves called Kaleidoscope. If you ever see Kaleidoscope, it's a great performer. I just threw this in because I saw this yesterday, and the butterflies again were all over it. And this is actually a native. It's perennial. ADOT uses this also as a good reseeder when they're revegetating along highways. So this is called Indian blanket flower. Some people call it blanket flower, but this is Gaillardia. Good perennial. And it doesn't totally go away in the winter. It just kind of gets a little crunchy, but just kind of cut it back and he'll be back and fine. This one is in bad need of deadheading, so I left it in here because I wanted to show you that all of these are the spent flowers. These are the little heads that have gone, excuse me, gone to seed. And when you deadhead something, don't just pinch off the flower. Take the whole stalk off so that you don't leave brown, ugly stalks. So once I deadheaded this, I was left with just beautiful flowers. And then you see this little guy, he's coming along, and there will be many more that come up behind this if I get this deadheaded. So she's not putting her energy into making seed. She'll be putting her energy into making new flowers. Can't talk about pollinator plants without talking about butterfly bushes. So butterfly bush, your regular, probably one of the most original one was called Black Knight. Black Knight is a deeper purple flower and it can get huge. Butterfly bushes grow really well in containers. They grow great in the ground. There are a whole variety of them. You can get them that a regular standard butterfly bush can get 10 feet tall if you let it. I've seen some that are even taller than 12. In the South, they're considered invasive, but here they are not. This guy can take a little bit more water if you have to put him in a wetter spot, but he's also very drought tolerant. Just keep him on a regular irrigation and you'll have tons of bloom and so much pollinator activity. This is a lighter purple. Oh, by the way, I was going to say, you can find them in different growth varieties too. You'll find them that'll be standard. You'll find them called semi-dwarfs. You'll find them called dwarfs. So you'll find them in variegated where the leaves come in green and white. You'll find all different color flowers. You'll find them in dark purple, light purple, pink, yellow, white. This is a close-up of a pink one we've got in the Discovery Gardens. Now, look at all the florets on one flower. You can see why that would be a feast. And usually, it's sort of dense, so they can really get in there and feel safe where they're not going to be attacked by some sort of a predator. It's just a wonderful, wonderful feeding plant. Okay, common name, fools you a little bit. So this is woolly butterfly bush. You would think that it would look something, if it's called butterfly bush, something like its sister, but it doesn't. Same genus, Buddleia. So regular butterfly bush is called Buddleia davidii. Woolly butterfly bush is called Buddleia marubifolia. This is quite different. This one wants only full hot sun. This grows like a Texas Ranger, so it looks beautiful if you've got a Texas Ranger garden. It'll even take the reflected heat off of a west wall. But this one really wants drainage. Again, this is like that Penstemon I talked about. You can put it on an irrigation, but make sure it's not in a downward berm. Make sure it's up where it can get its drink, but then the excess water can drain off. This is kind of their growth habit. If you let them be a little bit natural, you can see all the blossoms on here. So that flowers are little orange balls with multiple florets on them. This just happens to be an olive tree behind here. This plant here is a toothless desert spoon in a pot. I've had people ask me that. I threw it in. This is a close-up of your woolly butterfly bush. Again, a unique color, a unique flower. This is also, we've even got one of these in our moonlight garden because the leaves are so brightly silver that it looks beautiful in the moonlight. And there is a very close-up of its flower, and I put that on because I thought it was very appropriate because it looks like the COVID molecule. Anyway, but I thought, why did they have to use such a beautiful flower? Although I realize electron microscopy pulls up what it pulls up. But classic butterfly on that little guy, and so many little feeding spots for one little flower. Beautiful, beautiful plant. Okay, I could have gone on and I could have put in 50 more slides, but I know Chris really wants to get to lunch at noon, and I'm always his bad girl. I always go way too long and I can't help myself. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Dan, that was great. Thank you so much.
You're
am going
welcome.
to take advantage of that, though. We're going to stop the recording. We're going to bid adieu to our reviewers, the people who view it as a recording. But if people have some questions, as long as Janet can hang out.
Oh, I'll stay with you as long as you like.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.